So, in your profile, you also talk about your grandma, how she was a model for you in your life. You talked about her as an heroic figure. And I wonder, how did her life and her modeling influence you in your role as a mayor?
Well, my grandma was an immigrant from Poland. She came over as a war bride, didn't even know her husband. And I lived with my grandma when my mom and dad were married. We lived with my grandma for my first 5, 6 years of my life. Then we moved away. My parents got divorced, and then my mom and I moved back with my grandma. So she was pretty well the person I went to, you know, for lunch, etc. My grandma was probably the most environmentally sensitive person for her time. I mean, recycling was the norm. Everything was important. She had her own garden. She was had her chickens. We had a pig at one time. She managed a household with, you know, a basic check that she got, and a family that she had to look after. And
she was a single parent too.
She became a single parent when my uncle was only 18 months old. So she'd been a single. Well, she was my grandma. I never knew my grandpa because he died many years prior to me being born. But yes, so she was a strong person. She was very religious, but didn't sort of preach it in the sense that she just was a very nice person. I think a lot of my values came from just the way she treated people. If someone knocked on the door that needed help, she was sure that they got a sandwich. We were in a railroad town in Revelstoke, and it'd be often that someone used to call them hobos, travel up and down the line. And so, and just her basic, I guess, gardening that she believed in, and I love gardening. And
so it sounds like you learned a lot from her, just from her modeling, not necessarily her
it wasn't any, like, she
teaching,
didn't,
so
no,
to
it was
speak.
just my life with her, exactly, and just her mannerism and her love. She certainly, and my mom, because my mom had to work, she was a huge support to us as a family. So yeah, she became my model.
Thank you. Now, both you and Walter Gray, in the last election, emphasized the idea that leadership and vision were at the core of the election. What do you believe to be the qualities of a good leader in general, and in particular of a good mayor?
And that's probably, could spend an hour talking on both of those,
in a nutshell, what would you say?
Well, you know, leadership is always a difficult word to describe, especially when you're trying to describe how one does things. And I always have the word passion, you know, being passionate for an issue, being sure, and I'm a consensus builder. I believe in being a good listener. From my perspective, I think that was a quality that I always had the ability to kind of catch the undertones of things because I was a good listener. And I think that's a good quality for a leader to have. And just being able to be knowledgeable. You can't go into situations, and maybe it's my background, my education, that I believe that you had to be prepared. My Girl Guide background too, you know, being you know, ready for any situation. So being knowledgeable, even before I ran for council, I attended meetings for 4 years probably, to be sure that I'd like to do what I was going to maybe do, but also just to understand the process. And so I think that's important. For being mayor, you know, I think having a council background is very helpful. There are people that run for mayor in many communities that don't have that. They come in with business background, or they come in with a social background. I don't think there's a particular quality that makes someone a better mayor than another. I do think it does help to know the process, and again, being, you know, ready for that would be in a councillor position prior to that, because government, local government is quite complicated, and it's you know, there's lots to understand about what you can do, can't do, and as a mayor, you only have one vote. Everyone thinks that you're so powerful because you have, you know, you have that position and title.
It's quite different from the American system.
Oh, well, the American system, they have, sometimes I would think, yes, you know, being like a strong mayor is what, and we were called a weak mayor system because we have the one vote, and we have to have have a majority in order to move anything forward.
And develop consensus as well.
And develop. You know, although, look, I really appreciated if many times when we didn't have a 9-0 vote on things, because I think that represents the community in a much better way, because not everybody agrees 100% on everything, and everyone has their different ideas on so many different policies that we dealt with, that if it was split, you know, it happens, and I think that's good. I think that's good, because then you get the debate happening, you get a better understanding about what people have concerns about when you're trying to make a decision.
Now, you were recently awarded the Gert Beadle Award, which recognizes people that demonstrate a commitment to women's equality and social justice. You also said at one time that, I'll just quote it here, having 2 more women on council this time around is making a difference in how things are being decided. How did those women make a difference?
Well, you know, I sat on council for 2 terms, so 6 years, as the lone female represented at the table.
Was that lonely for you?
It was. Situation? It was at times, and particularly because we had predominantly male management. So there were many, many meetings that I was the lone female. And you know, I strongly believe that women bring a different perspective. I think we also set a different tone when we're in a room. And I think that what I realized is some of the things that women advocate for, and I have to say that some of the male councillors were right there as well. I mean, they were huge supporters on things that I was passionate about that might have been a little bit more the social side or the environment side.
What is the perspective that women bring, or in particular these women?
You know, well, the women that were with me in this last term, both were very environmentally conscious. One was particularly interested in culture, and the other one in sustainability.
So how is that different from the perspective a man would bring, for instance?
Well, they were passionate and didn't kind of quit in their sort of desire to make a change. They also, I don't know, like with women, I find they just bring a different ambiance.
Like an atmosphere, is that what you're saying?
It is more the atmosphere, and there's not, like, people aren't nasty to each other when women seem to be around. I mean, it's what I call like the old boys club is, I think, quite easily there if there's no women around. So the talk is different.
So they mitigate sort of the hard edges that sometimes men might bring?
I do, and I am one that believes in equality, not just gender but also age. I mean, we also had the youngest councillor ever in our last term. So age, I think, is really important. Ethnicity, I think, is important, and I don't think we're necessarily that well represented as a community in that aspect. And also in disabilities, because, you know, I actually promoted a committee for people with disabilities because I think that accessibility, no matter what the disability is really important in a community. And unless you have an advocate for someone at the table, it doesn't happen. So we had actually a women's committee for women and community for the last 6 years, which was unique to our city, and it only came about when I advocated for it. And you know, I think some of the male councillors were a little bit like, well, what is the difference of that committee? And what happened with that committee that I don't think would have resulted in any change if that hadn't been in existence was the domestic abuse became front and center. That's not something that council usually talks about. And because of the input from the women in the community, and there were some men that were involved in it, we ended up having a special RCMP officer hired to deal with domestic abuse, which was unique in our province. So women worry about, they worry because of we're nurturing and we're moms, and you know, it's just our natural part of us, I think. And
it's that missing piece that you, that
Soft,
mitigated.
there's a softness about the women. I mean, there's a few times when, you know, one of the female colleagues would say something, and inwardly I go, yes, because I had been advocating for that for a long time, but you know, sometimes your voice, it gets sort of, oh yes, right, you know, sure,
Yeah,
Councillor Shepherd at the time, or Mayor Shepherd, fine, but when you have that extra boost, I think it really is very positive.
We, in all levels of government, whether it be municipal, provincial, federal, we don't see many women in politics.
Not in Canada.
We see some, but is that because women are not generally interested in politics, or are there other reasons?
No, you know, I think women are truly very interested in politics, but I also look at the other leadership roles that women take on in this community, particularly Chamber, Downtown Business Association, Uptown Rutland Business Association. Women are getting involved in those. In the development community, there are women now taking major roles. So I think that women are interested. Politics takes a lot of time, and you know, I mean, I made a decision to not run my first 15 years ago. I was going to run a previous term to that, but I have 2 kids in high school, and I was very committed family-wise. And so that was part of my decision-making about getting into politics. It takes time. And
did you experience any sexism while as a mayor? Because you were the first female mayor of Kelowna.
I don't think it was stated as such, but I would maybe have thought, yes.
Yeah, okay. Right.
Yeah.
Did you want to give an example, or?
I probably wouldn't know one.
Okay, all right, okay.
Maybe when I figure out my memoirs and those memories start coming back.
Here's a question again about the last election. Now, at the end of the election, you remarked that it had been one of the most negative ones you had ever experienced. And there were lots of recrimination and lots of, you know, I suppose, name calling. And how do you believe this has impacted political life in Kelowna, especially for future elections?
Well, the name calling was not necessarily front and center, and certainly from the perspective, I was very proud of how our team dealt with the election. So my team, you know, and I had to be constantly, you know, saying, you know what, we've got goals. We're sticking to those goals. It doesn't matter what else is being said. It was sort of the question of nothing having been done. It was sort of always sort of trying to I guess, you know, protect all of the great the great things that had been achieved by just someone saying a few words of, well, nothing's been done, or you know, like particularly Kelowna wasn't open for business when we had just been acknowledged, you know, in being one of the best communities for business in the country, you know, in the top, I think, 13th or something. So, you know, those messaging were constantly out there, and it was hard to try to balance that with all of the good work. Because no matter, people seem to need to be reminded of things all the time as to what's being done. But when an election takes place, it seems a lot of hard work doesn't get recognized.
And how do you think that recrimination, that negativity, do you think it has impacted Kelowna politics, especially for the next election, or just elections in general? How do you believe it's impacted Kelowna politics?
Well, you know, I from my perspective, I think it's time, and I've said this publicly, that the community needs to have a better way of analyzing those that are running for positions. I think our community is getting too large to have particularly council candidates when you have 40 people to try to choose from, to try to recognize which ones have had some experience, which ones will bring a different perspective to the table in a very short time frame. And so I've been advocating that I think it's time to discuss whether we should go into a ward or a part ward system in our community, which would mean that you would have a designated, I'm sort of favoring, from my perspective, a part ward where you would have 4 councillors for 4 areas. So you'd have the Mission, the Glenmore, the Rutland, and then the downtown area. And people would run in those areas specifically to represent those communities.
I see, I see.
And then you'd have 4 at-large positions, so anyone else could run for the 4 at-large. And the mayor, of course, would be at-large. And why I like that system versus like 2 per ward designated, I think there'd be less backroom dealing, because that's always a concern is, well, how much stuff is going to be, well, we'll vote for your area to have something happen in, let's say, the Mission. Glenmore would side with them, and but next time, you know, Rutland might want something, and so I don't like that type of politics.